and to the wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all very much for coming here this afternoon to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for a briefing on something that took place last week. This is about the oil spill in Tobago, and that is what I've asked for you all to come here this afternoon and for you all to broadcast to the population. Basically an update on what has been happening with respect to this oil spill in Tobago, but more significantly, I'll spend some time this afternoon outlining to you something that took place in London in the United Kingdom last week. Just by way of background, we will all remember that it was on the 7th of February of this year. By mid-morning of that day, we first became aware as a population, and certainly us here at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, of an overturned vessel that had turned up on a reef in Tobago, on the coastline of Tobago, not too far from the shoreline of Tobago on the Atlantic side. And coming from that vessel was what appeared to be a hydrocarbon fuel that was leaking from the vessel. Immediately, the TEMA, the Tobago Emergency Management Authority, as well as the THA, and importantly the Ministry of Energy as the central figure from central government, the central ministry from central government, kicked into place and activated not only the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan, which puts the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries at the forefront and really supposed to be the body that nationally is managing any of these types of disasters. But Tobago also kicked in and instigated their oil spill contingency plan. And we worked closely together along with TEMA, we being the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, along with TEMA, THA, the Ministry of Works and Transport were involved because, of course, the Maritime Division and subsequent to that, a number of other ministries also had to get involved. You all would recall that by the 9th of February, the Minister of Works and Transport, Minister Sinanan, and myself visited Tobago. We met with the Chief Secretary, Farley Augustine, in Tobago to basically get a better idea and understanding of how they were managing this oil spill taking place. It is important at the outset for us all to be reminded that there was no apparent owner of this vessel. Absolutely no one came forward to take ownership, to take responsibility for a vessel. So we just woke up and found that this vessel had drifted onto a reef in Tobago, overturned, leaking an oil-like substance, with no one taking responsibility. Our immediate actions were to try and contain the oil-like substance from spreading too far out of the shorelines, and of course, the currents began to take it, and our immediate concern, of course, it being Tobago, where their economy is based predominantly on tourism, was to try and protect it from bending that southern part of the coastline to all of the beaches that are the attractions, part of the attractions of the Tobago tourism product, and that is to really go around that Crown Point, southern part of Tobago. So there were containment exercises. Fortunately, there were some companies on the ground in Tobago that were supporting one of our energy sector upstream companies, Woodside, that were able to provide some booms and to get that out into the water. Very shortly thereafter, the Prime Minister led a delegation, including Minister Sinanan and myself, the Permanent Secretary at Ministry of Energy and others. We also invited the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly. By the following weekend, which, as you all may recall, was the Carnival weekend, we went across with the Prime Minister to survey firsthand what was taking place, to receive a briefing, because by then we had sent immediately the heritage oil spill experts and any other experts that were available to Tobago to assist in the cleanup exercise, and we had started to deploy from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries a number of our resources, including service companies, to get on the ground in Tobago to both contain it in the water area, but to begin assessing the coastline which had been affected, as we know, by this oil spill that was taking place. We have kept you all periodically briefed and apprised of things that have gone on since then. The Prime Minister went across, he addressed himself and the Chief Secretary, Minister Sinanan and myself and others addressed the population from Tobago after we had received a briefing, and we were satisfied that all attempts were being made to try and not only contain, but subsequently to clean up the oil spill. It very quickly became apparent to us that unfortunately the expertise that was needed to deal with this type of oil spill, a vessel that was overturned, no one knew the exact specifics of this vessel. We were trying to determine it, etc. But also it was on the Atlantic side of the island on a reef where the waters at times were proving to be a little rough and therefore making it difficult for divers both to go down and to see and for surveys of the vessel, etc. We had immediately started to look for the right international expertise to assist us. Within a matter of weeks, the Ministry of Energy, with the approval of the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, had retained 2 of the internationally recognized experts in 1 containing, 2 cleaning up and removing these types of substances from vessels, and then 3 towage and salvage after, in the form of 2 North American United States companies, T&T Salvage LLC and QT Environmental Inc. And interestingly enough, these firms are now also retained. Those of you who are following news, international news, and saw the disaster that took place in Baltimore with the collapse of a bridge in Baltimore, these firms are also now working there as well to assist with the operations, just to give you an idea and an impression of the type of expertise. They came, they assessed the vessel, they brought down teams that did a proper assessment of the vessel, finally got divers in the water who were able to do all sorts of LiDAR-type equipment and assessments of the hull of the vessel. They were also utilizing their expertise for us to try and get specifics of this vessel. We reached out to the United States Coast Guard, who had records from decades ago when the vessel was first built in the United States, what it was initially used for, etc. And over time, you saw the ownership of the vessel change hands and the records became a little more difficult. But for our purposes and TT Salvage, they managed to get the original schematics of the vessel and then found out that over time, the vessel had been modified for the transportation of certain fuel cargoes, etc. in the United States and around. Basically, TT Salvage and QT have been on site with the vessel. They did their assessment and they came up with a plan which they presented to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, as well as the Maritime Division from the Ministry of Works and Transport. And that was approved, which was basically when they thought they had a fairly good assessment from the outside of the hull of the vessel as to how many various cargo departments and containers they had in the vessel, that they would penetrate the vessel using a hot tap water type cutting system and then put basically caps on it that they can lift and take off so nothing would spill out. And they started to get into the hull of the vessel and make their assessment. Right now, we are in the phase of removing the hydrocarbons. They're doing a good job at it. They remove the hydrocarbons, take them to certain containers on land, and then that is transported to the port of Scarborough, and then they will be taken via an oil barge to Trinidad and Tobago to be stored in Parias tanks. That exercise is ongoing. We will continue to provide you all with the necessary details with respect to it. In the meantime, of course, one of the questions that arises is cost, and how much is this operation going to cost? I should say at this stage, we had separated under the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan into 2 separate groupings. We had basically asked or agreed to Tobago under the THA and TEMA doing the on-land oil spill cleanup, which was really removal of that oil and that fuel, which we subsequently found out was a fuel, bunker C type fuel substance that is a heavy oil fuel that is used, for example, in power generation in some plants around the CARICOM region. We left the THA and TEMA to handle that onshore oil spill cleanup, whilst we at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries continue to work with the experts to focus on the vessel itself and the removal of the substance from the vessel in a safe manner, and hopefully that will be completed by the end of this month. We faced some difficult weather over the period of time that made it very difficult and on some days impossible for the crews to work safely on the vessel without there being any further oil spills. So of course, on those days with that type of weather, they did not do any work. So in the meantime, we at the level of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, as well as the Cabinet, started to ask the questions, well, what is this, and estimate the cost of how much this operation would eventually cost us in Trinidad and Tobago. What I can say is that the cost that we have estimated at this stage from the central government side, and certainly what we've been managing at the Ministry of Energy along with Heritage and other service providers that we've retained from central government and the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, we can be looking at anywhere from 14 to 20 million US dollars. That's our best estimate at this stage. And of course, in Tobago, they too, via the THA, have been incurring certain costs that ultimately will come to us at central government, and we will do an exercise along with the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Energy will do an exercise of looking at it to see what inside of those cost estimates or those costs that are put forward to us at central government are in fact reasonable costs for us to be able to deal with. The good news is, fortunately, in 2001, Trinidad and Tobago signed up to the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage, 1992. That's the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage, 1992, as well as the International Convention on the Establishment of an International Fund for Compensation for Oil Pollution Damage, 1992. So in 2001, we signed on to these bodies, which are basically international bodies that have a formula. If you're importing and exporting over a certain amount of tonnage of fuel a year, and it was 150,000 tons of fuel-type substance a year via maritime routes, you could join up with these bodies, and you had to contribute to these funds. So this Civil Liability Convention, as well as what we call the IOPC Fund Convention, the International Oil Pollution, the International Fund for Compensation for Oil Pollution Damage, existed. In 2018, when the Petrotrin refinery was closed down and we restructured Petrotrin, we no longer were making contributions to these funds since then. The basic purpose of these funds is described as funds to provide where no owners of vessels or those who are responsible for oil spills don't have sufficient insurance or coverage. And if you're a member of these funds, you can then apply to these funds and they will cover the reasonable cost of oil spill cleanup. So as I say, fortunately, we joined these bodies in 2001. We made all of our contributions, which were monetary contributions on an annual basis up to 2018. And since 2018 to now, we continue to fulfill all of our obligations in terms of reporting on an annual basis the types of activities taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. So immediately, the Ministry of Energy in February identified that there may be a possibility for Trinidad and Tobago to access the benefit of this fund, which is basically like an insurance or fund that would pay for the reasonable cost of an oil spill. And we immediately reached out to them within a number of weeks, within a 2-week period of the oil spill taking place. We had filed with them the documentation to say that there may be a possibility of us claiming from this fund. Again, because of the relationship, one managed by the Ministry of Energy over the years, where we've sent officers up to this fund on an annual basis when they have their annual meetings. We had a relationship with them, and they sent down 2 sets of people, which are quite important. Unfortunately, as time went on, it worked to our benefit, these people who had come. The first was that they sent experts from something called the International Tankers Owners Pollution Federation. International Tankers Owners Pollution Federation, the ITOP. This body sent either 3 to 5 experts to Tobago to give advice as to how the oil spill should be dealt with and the type of expertise that should be utilized. They were looking at cost and this type of thing. So basically, they were like claims adjusters that were sent by the fund to Tobago, and the Ministry of Energy worked throughout the period of time They still have one individual on the ground there in Tobago, more going to come in the next few weeks. And we've been taking their advice, we've been involving them in our major decision making, and most importantly, we have been following their advice. Also, during that period of time, the IOPC sent two of their persons, the deputy director as well as the claims manager to Tobago, and they continued to work along with us at the Ministry of Energy to oversee how we were dealing with the oil spill. Now, these points are very, very important because it showed that they had an interest in at least what was going on with Tobago. I subsequently discovered that they have an interest in oil spills all over the world, but it does not necessarily mean that they would provide any monetary compensation for those oil spills. So these are basically bodies that are set up. They operate in London, in the United Kingdom, out of the International Maritime Office, and they operate out of these offices and basically monitor oil spills around the world. And more importantly, they are like the policing body to basically ensure or try to ensure that membership bodies, membership countries that are part of it, do the necessary, making sure that ships have insurance, that ships have oil spill insurance in case if they're carrying fuel and these types of oils, in case there's any accident out there on the seas that they would be able to cover. An important element of this exercise has been us trying to trace and to track the owners and those responsible for this vessel. And I'd like to say that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, I certainly am satisfied, having seen all of the work that has been done by the Maritime Division out of the Ministry of Works and Transport, as well as our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard using their intelligence contacts throughout the islands, as well as they managed to get help from the Canadian government and a number of other agencies. We've also contracted via the Maritime Division, an international satellite company, that we've been doing all that is reasonable and all that can be expected to trace those who are responsible for these two vessels. We know at this stage there was this barge that is overturned, or a ship that was being used as a barge to transport this fuel, was being pulled along at certain times by a tug. We've heard the names Gulfstream, which is the last name that was seen on this vessel as overturned in Tobago. We've also seen documentation that suggests that the tug that was carrying it along during parts of this journey is something called the Solo Creed. But we've also been provided with documentation that suggests changes of names, etc., through the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. As you would have heard previously, we have made the official request of certain countries: Tanzania, Nigeria, Panama, Aruba, Curacao, for assistance in tracing and tracking those responsible, and in particular the owners of these vessels. Unfortunately, at this stage, despite all of those efforts, we have not been able as yet to ascertain with any degree of certainty who the owners are. When I come to what happened in London next week, hopefully this will provide you, the population, with a better understanding of what happens in instances such as this. So these two bodies exist for this repayment or assistance with covering the cost of the oil spill. We then took a decision, because there was to be a meeting of this fund in London. They meet a couple times a year, and there was to be a meeting at the end of April in London where it was possible for them to hear a claim by Trinidad and Tobago for coverage under this fund. The Cabinet had initially taken a decision to send a delegation to represent Trinidad and Tobago to make the case for Trinidad and Tobago at the IOPC for coverage of this fund. And that was to be led by Ms. Sandra Fraser, the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, and the alternate head of the delegation was His Excellency Vishnu Danpal, our High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago in the United Kingdom. We then also had Mr. Mark Rudder, the Deputy Permanent Secretary acting at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. Mr. Rudder is someone who's been working along with this fund and someone that you, the taxpayers, have invested a lot of money in, and at the Ministry of Energy in being able to provide expertise when you have oil spills in Trinidad and Tobago. We had Mr. Ronald Alfred, currently Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Works and Transport, who is also the Director of Maritime Services. We had Ms. Indira Ramkisoon Rambaros, Senior State Counsel at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. We had the Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, Captain Steve Don Polo. We had Dr. Eva Maxam, the Director of the IMA, the Institute of Marine Affairs, and then Ms. Urvashi Ramnarayan, the Head of the Chancery at our High Commission in London. So we had quite a large delegation approved by Cabinet to go up and make the submissions to this body. However, when the Cabinet saw the amount and the costs be starting to come in, and that we would basically have one shot at convincing this international body that they should agree that Trinidad and Tobago's claim should be covered, and in particular this oil spill in Tobago, the Cabinet took the decision that I, as Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, should lead the delegation to London to literally make the case to this body to convince them. Because when we looked at it, there were a number of hurdles that we needed to get over. And the legal advice that we had got at that stage was this was certainly not a clear-cut shot at it, and there was no 100% guarantee of success. There were a number of legal hurdles, as well as legal hurdles in terms of definition of qualifying, but then also some legal hurdles in that Trinidad and Tobago had not taken certain steps to put in place these conventions that I've referred to as domestic legislation in Trinidad and Tobago. And interestingly, the legal opinion that I received as the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries ended by saying, after they listed all of these things, the effect as a result may not result in a favorable decision from the IOPCF, the IOPC fund, that would enable the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to obtain compensation from the fund in accordance with the convention. So we had the legal officers providing an opinion that based on all of these difficulties, it was not, the net effect was that it would not result in a favorable decision to Trinidad and Tobago. I led this delegation to the United Kingdom last week. We made our submissions to the IOPC. We had to settle the written submissions. Fortunately, I have legal training and background, which I like to refer to, and settle the submissions that were prepared for me by the team, and we submitted it before we went up to United Kingdom, and we submitted these submissions on the 24th of April, 2024, and these submissions were to be circulated. It's basically going before a whole board and people, and then various members of the country membership that were present. So you were literally sitting in a room in front of a board that would make the decision, and they had representatives from over 60 or 70 countries who would then decide our fate. We made our submission on Monday, the 29th of April. I led this delegation to London. We went up, and on the 29th of April, we appeared before the fund. Interestingly, before that, for the morning period, Tobago featured quite predominantly in the discussions taking place that morning. There were a number of presentations where we featured that there was this oil spill in Tobago, all of the difficulties in locating the owners of the vessel, but also the difficulties in the cost, etc. We made the presentation. I was permitted to make oral submissions and to try and persuade the body and the members as to why we in Trinidad and Tobago should get access to the fund. And on that same day, there were deliberations, there was a lot of discussion. And I am pleased to advise that the decision coming out of the submissions we made and the persuasive submissions that we made, the fund's executive committee decision is as follows. The 1992 Fund Executive Committee decided that the 1992 Civil Liability and Fund Conventions would apply to this incident, and they immediately authorized the director to make payments of compensation in respect of claims arising from this incident. So I am glad to report to Trinidad and Tobago that leading the delegation, we made submissions to the IOPC fund, and we were successful in those submissions, getting over a number of hurdles. We have given an assurance to the fund that we will continue to work with them to try and locate the owners of these vessels and those who are responsible for it, and that if we are able to pursue any claims, we will then subrogate those claims to the IOPC fund. The good news, though, Trinidad and Tobago, is that we have succeeded in persuading the executive committee that for the Tobago oil spill incident, all reasonable claims that are made will be compensated by this fund. Immediately thereafter, we have engaged them, and we at central government, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, are going to lead the charge with submitting to them our claims for compensation from the fund. And I expect that the vast majority, if not all, of the submissions by the central government through the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries of the cost to the taxpayers in Trinidad and Tobago of dealing with this oil spill from the 7th of February to whatever is the date that it finally ends, we will receive that compensation from this fund. With respect to the Tobago and the THA, again, we will work with them along with the Ministry of Finance to look at the claims being made there, and we at central government will take the responsibility of submitting the cost incurred that are reasonable costs that we believe can be recovered from this fund. So I've asked you all to come here today to give you the assurance that once again, due to the decision-making of the Cabinet and the very competent public servants that we have here at the Ministry of Energy, along with those from the Ministry of Works and Transport, the IMA, and the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, who accompanied me and provided a level of support. We were successful last week in London in persuading the fund. What also happened in the hours that I was before the executive committee making the submissions is it became apparent that there is an industry that is taking place out there globally in the maritime industry where you have these rogue vessels and these rogue owners who are doing exactly what the owners of the Solo Creed and the Gulfstream did, which is they are not submitting proper documentation, they're not submitting proper ownership, they may or may not have insurance, they may or may not be transporting legal or illegal fuel. At this stage, it looks as though they may have picked up fuel from Venezuela, but of course that would have been covered. It would not have been embargoed fuel from the documentation I have seen that has been made available. The vessels were on the way to Guyana, and we have from the authorities in Guyana a request by the Solo Creed for pilots to come and assist them into Guyana during the period where it actually turned up on the shores in Tobago. So we are pursuing all of the leads that we have. We have been receiving now as well assistance from the United States. The Canadian government got involved and they were assisting. What I can tell you is after I made the extensive submissions on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, we had a lot of the representatives of various governments come up to us in Trinidad and Tobago offering assistance, but also telling us and assuring us that they will continue to support us. So, fortunately, the question that is asked all of the time is, what is the cost? What is the cost? I've had colleagues in the parliament asking the government as to what is the cost, as though we are somewhat responsible for this. We have managed to persuade the IOPC fund to cover the cost of cleanup in this oil spill incident. So that is what I asked you all to come here today for, to just give you all this update, because I expect that the decision of the IOPC fund will be made public very shortly. They are also sending down the director as well as the claims manager in a few weeks back to Tobago via Trinidad to meet with us and to begin the processing of the claim and also to view what is going on in Tobago. What I can tell you at Tobago, the operations continue to go well. I'm hoping they will be wrapped up by the end of this month in terms of removing all of the hydrocarbons from the vessel, and that thereafter we will look at removal of the vessel in the safest possible manner from where it is currently overturned on the reef. And at this stage, that is the report that I have to give you all here in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's good news that the costs, the reasonable costs that are legitimately incurred by us in cleaning up this oil spill will be covered by the IOPC fund, thanks to the good work of the public servants and I guess myself going there to make the submissions. Thank you. I'll take questions at this stage. If you just identify yourself and then question. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Jules Brown, TV6 News. Minister, I'm just wondering, given the fact that you had mentioned that one of the prerequisites in terms of contributions to the fund, for example, when the refinery is operating, and then, of course, it's been mothballed since late 2018, how were you and your team able to convince the fund that that Trinidad and Tobago should get this compensation?
Jules, before coming into politics, I was a very successful and persuasive lawyer in the courts. I'd like to think that had a big part to do with it. No, the truth is, we looked at the law. We had a couple legal hurdles. So, for example, was it a ship? And technically speaking, it was not a ship. But we managed to persuade them based on past precedents. It was a ship. Another issue that had come up was it oil? And they have special definitions. But I think it is because we have been such a good member of the fund up till 2018, and we continue with our reporting. Now, we would have been crossing those hurdles with the importation of crude and then the exportation of refined product during that period of time. So, fortunately, Jules, we did manage to persuade them. We looked very carefully at the areas of the law and the applicability of the various conventions that could apply to Trinidad and Tobago. And honestly, I think what made the difference was the quality of the delegation that went up there, but quite frankly, the fact that the Minister of Energy and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister saw it fit, the cabinet saw it fit to send me there to make the submissions, because they did remark at the end of the day for the government minister to take that much interest in it. It highlighted and it sort of lifted it up. You also had them basically referring the other member states. They were very, very happy that we took the time to make the level of submissions and the detail of submissions that I did make orally on that day that I could not have done without the assistance of those who went with me.
And in terms of once the funds are received, or the payment from the fund, it goes to the government, who then would pay, let's say, the service providers?
No. Service providers would stop work if we weren't paying them. So Cabinet did give Ministry of Energy approval for us to go ahead and to contract, for example, TT Salvage and QT, and to make the payments to them, etc. So we will pay them, and it's basically a reimbursement. But what I've asked the fund to do is work with us as quickly as possible so we can get that back as quickly as possible for them. So it's a reimbursement from the fund.
Thanks for that clarification. Another thing, Minister, in terms of what you mentioned, in terms of where the fuel, as you said, had originated from and where it was going
May have originated from, huh?
May have. Are you satisfied that there were no issues in terms of whoever may have been involved in this trying to avoid U.S. sanctions with regard to the issue of...
Jules, the truth is, there is absolutely no level of certainty around that whatsoever, because in this instance, as member states were saying, they found it not unusual, because this has happened before, but when you're dealing with rogue individuals who have not surfaced up to this time, every vessel has basically a tracking device on it. There are technical terms for it, and these vessels turn them off. Right, so after this incident, it literally has gone off and has gone rogue since then. You're not supposed to be in the open seas without this on. So we have, and I can't give too much information, but a number of allied countries assisting us. We've also paid an international satellite tracker to help us to locate the vessel and to find out more about it. So at this stage, it's a lot of speculation. You've seen speculation in the media where they've pieced together using satellite imagery. That is useful for you to have an idea, but of course it provides no certainty in terms of documentation, etc. So I can't say where the fuel came from. I have seen what has been suggested in the public domain on open source, and I know at the time with respect to Venezuela, for example, there was General License 44 from OFAC that allowed the trade, and I know for a fact that was in place as of November of last year, and it is still in place until the end of May, well, the end of this month. It was supposed to expire on the 18th of May, and there's a wind down. So it is based on that I'm saying that if, in fact, there was fuel taken from Venezuela during that period of time, it may not have been embargoed, but I am in no position to clarify anything on that.
Vishana Pagu from the Express. You mentioned that there's an industry based on rogue vessels. So how is the government and the ministry going to ensure something like this doesn't happen again?
There's nothing that the government and the ministry can do with respect to that. But what it did, this particular incident at the IOPC fund meeting last week, and is going to be now taken to the International Maritime Organization, is that more has to be done here. And I'll tell you something, the light wasn't cast on Trinidad and Tobago because we had no indication this vessel wasn't destined for Trinidad and Tobago. That's part of the submission I made, that this vessel has no connection to Trinidad and Tobago. No one in Trinidad and Tobago contracted it. The fuel, if it was not destined for Trinidad and Tobago, so literally it washed up on our shores. So what the members of this, and I mean, you're talking about the Netherlands, you're talking about Canada, South Korea, Japan, a whole host, Norway, United Kingdom, the United States, all of them got involved, the UAE, Turkey, etc., is that ports who have these vessels in it, so you would have seen suggestions, for example, that the vessels were in Panama for quite a period of time, they have a responsibility when a vessel is leaving the port to ensure, one, is seaworthy, and two, that they have the proper documentation, including insurance in place. So this actually sparked in that meeting a whole new debate that was then put on the agenda for the next few days and is now going to be carried on into the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, for more discussion as to how that can be policed, because that is an international duty and a job. And it's really these countries, you have to basically do a verification exercise when a vessel is coming in or leaving. So Trinidad and Tobago, we had the Director of Maritime Services there, and they will work along with customs and the other bodies that have jurisdiction over vessels coming into Trinidad and Tobago legitimately.
Hi, Ryan Hamilton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. Well, the question I really want to ask is, as far as the claims are concerned, would we be reimbursed in whole for the amount that we are thinking? Is it a percentage? Is it a whole?
It is basically the decision is that they reimburse you. They authorize the director to make payment of compensation in respect of claims arising from this incident. So you'll need to satisfy the claims director and the fund that they're legitimate claims. So for example, you can't go and put that you throw a party inside of there. So there's legitimate claims. And I am satisfied as the Minister of Energy, certainly the cost that we've incurred for the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago here at the Ministry of Energy would be legitimate costs like TT salvage, QT, some of the other costs with heritage and these types of things. But they will reserve the right to say yes or to say no. So I would hope that all of our legitimate claims that are put in, we get 100% coverage, but there's no guarantee in that. It's better. I'm just glad that we're getting access.
And I really don't want to sound like the opposition here, but I have to
then
ask,
don't.
How much have we incurred so far? And if there is an assessment to be going further on, if the final cost isn't, completely
absolutely. Well, it's impossible at this stage to say what the final cost would be because there remains uncertainty. If the sea conditions become rough and the crews have to be on standby instead of working for a day, you incur costs as a result of that. God forbid something further should complicate it. I assume costs would rise there. An estimate of costs that we have seen at the central government level, meaning here at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, getting from Heritage and the others that we have contracted, an estimate within current ballpark figures is about, I believe it is 12 million US so far. And then, of course, you have THA who are submitting as well claims to the Ministry of Finance. So when making the submissions to the fund, I told them, look, you're looking at something, I assume, but it could go up or it could go down, in the region of maybe 30 million US dollars. The fund was fine with that. I mean, in some of the other incidents that they've dealt, it's been far in excess of that. What helps us in Trinidad and Tobago is that we had the foresight and the sensibility here at the Ministry of Energy to immediately engage the fund. So as I said, they sent people down here. So they were on the ground with us in Tobago and they would have seen the reasonable decision making. And they also sent their experts, the ITPOF, to be here with us, and we took the advice of these experts. So if those are your experts and they're saying do X, Y, and Z, and then you competently do X, Y, and Z, I think it would be difficult for them to then come and say, hey, it was unreasonable to do X, Y, and Z. So I feel satisfied that we have a level of coverage, but of course there can be no guarantee.
And while we're on the topic of course, environmental effects, and has the government or any bodies that are dealing with the spill been able to assess any kind of environmental effect and what's happening there?
That has been going on from the word go. You've had the IMA, the EMA, and other bodies there. I was very pleased to see when we went across and we made those site visits along with the Prime Minister, Minister Sinana, and myself, that Heritage had actually sent in experts who deal with the environment. So there literally were companies that we retained through Heritage who were there dealing with the mangrove life, dealing with the wildlife, etc. And they were there prepared to clean animals. I mean, it was really that level of granular detail. So that is taking place, but there is to continue to be an assessment. And I saw one of the recommendations from the experts sent by the fund, the ITPOF, who are here in Tobago. They are looking at those elements and saying, look, there needs to be some more onshore cleanup work in these areas to assist the environment. Fortunately, they were able to get some booms in place. Fortunately, when we got TT Salvage in, they use a very sophisticated quick cleanup system called the NOFI system, where they literally had it attached to tugs, and it pulled all of the oil away and cleaned up. We have been very fortunate, knock on wood, with this incident compared to the other examples that they were dealing with at the IOPC fund. And I mean, those are examples of spills that took place, for example, in the Philippines and Malaysia, in Israel, and these types of things a few years ago.
Hi, good afternoon. Peter Christopher from Guardian Media. Of course, earlier today, another suggestion was made with regard to the use of the wreckage to help re-stimulate the marine life and the reef.
Who made that suggestion?
I just heard the suggestion on my way here.
Okay.
I was just wondering if this was among the considerations. As
I am not an expert in that area, and I'll be guided by the experts. I found it a little strange when I heard that, because this is a vessel that was carrying hydrocarbon fluids, which by definition, you're not going to clean completely the inside of it. Think, for example, your car, your vehicle. You can't go and clean completely the inside of your gas tank. There may be residue, your engine, etc. So certainly that is not the current thinking, nor the intention of the government. We want to safely remove the hydrocarbons and then safely get the ship removed and salvaged. I know that there are some who believe you can then sink it and create a natural reef, etc. That's premature, and certainly that will have to be guided by experts. It's not on the cards right now.
And just on a point of clarification, of course, the fund, they have had their officials here and they've made their own assessments and suggestions. Is this in any way, these suggestions, are they in any way tied to the compensation that we receive in terms of the percentages?
I don't think it's tied to it whatsoever, but I think we did the right thing by inviting them and by facilitating and having them oversee the decision making. As I just explained to Ryan, if I bring you in as the expert and you tell me do A, B, and C, and I do A, B, and C following religiously how you tell me to do A, B, and C, I think you'll be hard-pressed to then turn around at the end when I say, okay, well, A, B, and C cost this, you were there at the outset, please now compensate me, and they turn around and say no. There may be some instances outside of that where people have done X, Y, and Z, but that is for them. I am satisfied at this stage at the central government level, overseen by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, that we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's.
As you mentioned, the issue of rogue actors in the maritime industry, are you satisfied that the government, that is, that there were no other issues of any other types of illegal substances being carried by the vessel? There was the discovery of a package on the shoreline at one point, that kind of thing.
Satisfied is a strong word. I have heard no further reports of it, and I would have thought by supposition, which I don't like to do, that if the vessel was carrying any further illegal substances, then it would have surfaced by now, no pun intended, because you have these international contractors who've now cut into the hulls, they've gone in there, they're extracting, and there's been no further indication of any narcotics or anything like that. I remember at the time, and the police report at the time said that particular area of the coastline of Tobago has been utilized in the past by those involved in nefarious organized crime activities, and that may have been as a result of that. We have had since then to now absolutely no further incidents like that, and I think if the vessel did contain such substances, it would have come to light by now.
And also, has the government, or let me rephrase the question, has anyone in the tourism sector in Tobago made any claims in terms of any losses that they may have suffered because of this oil spill? And if so, how would that be treated?
I am not aware of any such claims as yet. I am not putting it past that there may be such claims. I mean, a big part of the submission that I made to the IOPC is understand that Tobago, their economy is based on tourism. I mean, it is essential to note that Tobago's domestic economy is completely dependent on tourism, and in particular, its pristine white coral sand beaches and crystal blue waters. So you're sitting there in dreary London making these submissions, and that's what an advocate does, right? Try to get their mind to picture Tobago. Those things can be covered by the fund, but again, at this stage, we are going to deal with the central government and the legitimate claims from the THA to this fund to make sure that the taxpayers get full coverage, or as much coverage as is possible.
Minister Sonolala, TDT News. I know you said you're hoping to get 100% of the claims reimbursed, but realistically speaking, do you have a percentage in mind of how much we might get reimbursed?
From being there present, as I said, they were dealing with past claims against the fund, one in Israel, where they never located the vessel. They just literally had oil rolling up on the beaches, etc. One in the Philippines, where they said there were over 3,000 claims being made, and these types of things. I did not get a sense of how much, but what they were very clear about, and in us discussing with the claims manager, once is legitimate expenses incurred and cost incurred, you will receive compensation for it. So I can't put a percentage on it. I would hope that all of our legitimate claims and the costs that we incurred will be compensated.
You spoke about finding the owners of the vessel. How confident are we to actually find, and is it like looking for a needle in a haystack?
Or like a drop in the ocean? It is a very difficult task. I mean, the fact that we haven't, but right now there's been a recent lead, and I don't want to say more on it, but what I felt, as I said earlier, an assurance about is I'm satisfied that all of the reasonable steps to trace and to locate this vessel are being taken by the government. And I mean, understand we can only reach out. Our jurisdiction is Trinidad and Tobago. So if I reach out to another country via a diplomatic note or a request, or via legal request, via the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty request, and ask them for help, you're then counting on them to be able to provide the necessary assistance. But I was satisfied, as I say, the government of Canada's representatives there came up afterwards, their person from their Navy or Coast Guard, and spoke to our commanding officer, and then engaged me as minister and said that they are glad that they're able to assist, etc. And there are a number of other countries that will also assist us now. I mean, it's been highlighted, the International Maritime Organization, that is the body, and they're very, very aware after last week of our position. And all of the people who contributed after our submissions are prepared to work with us and to assist.
Minister, is it all right if I ask one off-topic question?
I would expect nothing less, but go ahead.
I think it was either last week or probably week before the Prime Minister spoke of a possible buyer or somebody that may have some interest in the Petrotrin refinery. I just want to find out a little bit more about that, if you have any further information that you could share, and how is that deal progressing or conversations progressing?
As the Honourable Prime Minister indicated, and as I put forward to the population in an op-ed within the last couple of days, we have always preserved the refinery and advocated for someone who has the necessary ingredients to come forward and restart the refinery and get it operating. That would be the government's on our wish list. The Prime Minister indicated that there was a particular group that we felt a sense of optimism about. We continue to be in that. I am hoping in the not too distant future, we would see the necessary boxes being ticked. I mean, you have to have a source of crude. You have to have the engineering where it all. You have to have the ability to safely restart it and the financial capabilities to do so. I had a meeting with some of the individuals from it, right, as they were going through their due diligence. And I felt a sense of optimism, but let's wait and see. I don't want to be premature, and I'm hoping that should be sometime in the not too distant future, the assessment and evaluation. They have to put in a proposal, and the assessment and evaluation will then be done.
Is there anything that you could say presently about the situation concerning Naikwan?
I have seen Naikwan featuring quite predominantly in the newspapers. I've been following the utterances of Mr. Gill and others with respect to it. There's nothing further for me to add at this stage. I mean, what I can say is that Mr. Gill took a decision to sue the government in the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago. He was not successful there in getting a injunction for Trinidad and Tobago Upstream Downstream Energy Company Limited to provide them with fuel. At the end of the day, the taxpayers supplied $21 million in gas to this entity. You have to bring that to an end at some stage. The company took a decision to terminate. That was upheld by the High Court. They then appealed to the Court of Appeal. It was not. They then withdrew that appeal. They then started arbitration proceedings. And then that went to mediation. The mediator did something very strange there in that a mediation doesn't give a decision or an opinion. A mediator sits with two parties who oppose each other and sees if you can find the middle ground. No middle ground was found, but I see Mr. Gill holding on to some utterances that's the highest level I will put it at as an attorney at law of the mediator. They then, I'm not sure if they're pursuing that, they then start an international treaty. The government will defend itself. We will defend ourselves quite competently. And I am not going to say much more than that because, of course, their legal proceedings abound.
Just returning back to the oil spill in Tobago, I'm wondering, in the aftermath of that, have you had any conversation with the Ministry of National Security in terms of looking at the issue of maritime boundary protection, increased patrols and things, and looking out for those rogue actors in the maritime sector?
I am a former Minister of National Security. I still sit on the National Security Council. I am in contact almost daily with the Minister of National Security. I know the working assets that they have there in terms of the technology that exists, etc. I want us to understand, as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, this was an overturned vessel. If you had seen the vessel when it first was overturned, before it ended up on the reef, so even the first couple of days when it was on the reef, before it settled, all you were seeing at the time, and you may have seen the videos, is a small part of the underside of the vessel, which of course bobbing up and down in the global, not the global, in the waters is very, very difficult to pick up. So I know that the Ministry of National Security and the elements of national security are working hard on border protection. My view of this is would have been extremely difficult to pick that submerged, overturned vessel coming in until it ended up on the shore. And as I emphasized last week in London, and it was accepted, this vessel had nothing to do with Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, I put in the submissions and repeated it to them. It came like a thief in the night.
And just one other thing, in terms of the response, there's a national oil spill or hydrocarbon spill plan and so on. We've seen the work being done by all of those involved. But have you done a review to see what else could be needed or could be more helpful?
Jewel, that will have to be done, right? A post-mortem will have to be done. I can tell you, I mean, apart from the initial few days when it happened, and, you know, there's always a sense of pressure during those few uncertain days. I am satisfied with how the Ministry of Energy handled it. We've had people on the ground there from day one providing the expertise. Heritage stepped forward. We had Woodside, BP, Shell, EOG, all of the companies who are in Trinidad, they all offer their assistance. Right now, fortunately, it's under control, but we will have to do a post-mortem. I think the communication picked up properly, after a bit of a period, and then people understood their various roles and this type of thing. There will be a post-mortem, but I think at this stage it was satisfactory in how it was handled.
Minister, just to return to the NICON topic, has the ministry...
You could finish that sentence. You've been asked by somebody to ask me. Go on.
Yes, the NICON fatality last year, the ministry's report into the investigation, rather, has that been completed? And
what I want to say, thanks for that, Peter. I saw it being suggested in the media that the ministry, and actually might have actually been by the opposition, a certain member of parliament, suggesting that the Ministry of Energy gave NICON, after that unfortunate and tragic fatality, the green light to restart the plant. That is absolutely incorrect. We have not given any such thing. So that exercise is a to and fro, and I am not quite certain it ever came to the completion of that toing and froing before the course of action, as I just outlined, as much as I'm prepared to say at this stage. They decided to commence litigation, etc. Of course, when you commence litigation, life takes a very different perspective. So I think that is nowhere. There were drafts that were done, etc., but it had not reached completion because, as I say, you then have to present it to the other side. They have to provide their comments for fairness and natural justice, etc. But events superseded that. All right? That's it. Thank you all very much. I'll use the opportunity to just say tomorrow we are dealing with the results of the audit of the country's reserves, and I'll discuss that tomorrow. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Understanding diplomatic protocol and why it matters. This Thursday, the 9th of May at 6 p.m., Shana Weston is going to be giving us a crash course